Welcome back to another episode of the Mindful Hunter podcast. I'm your host as always, Jay Nichol. You are about to listen to a podcast that I recorded this week with John Barklow. John Barklow leads big game product development for Sitka. He's a veteran of the Navy. He used to design the clothing system for the Navy SEALs, specifically for their deployments in Afghanistan and some other pretty insanely rugged places that had very unique kind of clothing and gear challenges. John is also an extremely accomplished hunter. One fun fact, he's taken 5 goats with his bow, which just blows my mind. On top of that, he's probably one of the nicest dudes in the industry. Like, he was spending time and chatting with me before, I even had a podcast or did anything. None of that shit mattered to him. He's just a really good dude, and he likes to share his experience and wisdom. He has a phenomenal new newsletter. You can go to his website, knowledgefromstorms.com. All the links will be in the show description. And his Instagram is just an unbelievable resource. It's basically just a combination of videos where he does deep dives into technical hunting related topics. And it's not just all Sitka. Like, he'll talk about the type of clothing you need to wear, like a grid fleece or static insulation or dynamic insulation. And he might reference a couple Sitka pieces that would fit this build, but by no means is it just a big advertisement. And that really impresses me about John. Originally, we were supposed to do this podcast focusing on whitetail gear because I'm about to leave for Alberta. But actually, we haven't spoken in quite a while, and it was great just to catch up. So this podcast goes all over the place. So I hope you enjoy. As always, if you can engage with the platform in any way, like, comment, share, subscribe, it's all greatly appreciated. So without further ado, here's John Barklow.
Good morning.
How's it going, John?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, good, man. Doing good.
Sorry for the early morning.
No, this actually works out
connection.
Great.
Okay.
I'm supposed to take off on Monday or Tuesday for my hunt. So like this week was just slammed. So
Yeah.
Kids still sleeping, house is still quiet. It's perfect time.
Cool. So where you, I guess we'll talk about it, but where you headed? Somewhere north?
Yeah, north of Edmonton, Athabasca.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you're headed north.
Yeah,
Pretty
it's
good.
about maybe 13-hour drive. I was going to fly, but I don't like, if I can avoid it, I don't like flying on hunts. It stresses me out because then I got to worry, is there going to be flight delays and stuff? And then 2, getting the meat back home. And The other thing with the young family at home, it's like if I tag out early to just be able to hop in the truck and rip home is always a big benefit.
Yeah. Yeah, for all those reasons, I'll try, if at all possible, to drive. Yeah, it's so much more convenient.
Yeah.
And you got all your stuff there.
That's the other thing, because you're going to start making compromises. It's funny, the place where I flew out of for sheep hunting this year, it's about a 22-hour drive, which is like, now you're starting to get into 2-day territory. Like anything under 16, I can muscle out in a day, and it doesn't extend my trip too drastically. But 22, and it's like you're almost at 4 travel days for a 10-day hunt. Like, it starts to get. And they've started doing this charter service out of one of the airports down in Vancouver. And I'm kind of thinking, and the other thing is, a sheep isn't as big as like a big deer or an elk. So I'm kind of contemplating flying up for that next year because it's literally like a couple hour flight, and they take you right to the lodge, and then you take your float plate in the next day.
Sweet. Yeah. When you're backpack hunting, you don't have a lot of gear anyways.
That's the other thing. Yeah.
When you're whitetail hunting, you want, you just got more stuff.
Yep.
And 100%. You want maybe a change of clothes because you're not going to be able to wash or whatever it is, But I just find I have more stuff when I go whitetail hunt. Yeah.
No, I agree. Do you have video on your end, John?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, if I was fucking smart enough to turn it on. There we go.
There we go.
We just talked the whole time thinking you're looking at me, and
Yeah. No, it's all good. I was like, well, if I don't say something, he's not going to say something, so I'm just going to jump in. How's the fall going, man? Let's catch up. It's been ages.
It's been a good fall. It's never quite as good as you want, and it's never as long as you want, right?
Totally.
I don't know if I'll write it this for December or not, but it took me like 2 weeks. It was like not depression, but when elk season ended, and I'm like, man, why am I feeling this way? Like I hunted 20 days. I had this great season. Like I killed one bull. I came damn close several times to killing a really big bull. And in Montana, I killed one in Utah. I killed a mule deer. And I'm like, cause it's over. Like, cause it's over already. And like that, whatever that feeling is I get hunting in the mountains, I just have to wait another year, And then I realized I was more fired up, than I was when the season started even, right? Which is good for next year. But yeah, so good season, great elk encounters. Missed an antelope early in a hunt, just had a bow issue. It was a long shot, but that one still kind of haunts me. Not because it was like a huge antelope, but I just ate missing after putting all that effort in.
What are you shooting these days for a bow?
This year is a RX-7 Ultra from Hoyt.
Okay, same.
So it wasn't the bow's fault, actually. It was the sight was off, and it was just my lack of attention to detail. But so I'm going to go down to Texas here in 2 weeks, hunt Aoudad again in the Davis Mountains. I was down there a couple years ago for work. It's not a legit sheep hunt in the sense of what you guys do up there, what we did in Alaska, but it's mountains, it's rugged, there's snakes, you got to hike. They're not easy to kill.
Davis, West Texas?
Yeah, Southwest Texas.
Yeah, okay. I've only gone Aoudad once. I think I was near a town called Terlingua.
I don't even know if I'd know the town.
I was maybe like 4 hours southwest of Midland. Like I flew into Midland and then just drove for about 4 hours. Yep, it was pretty out there, but it's rugged, man.
That's exactly where we're headed. We fly into Midland and going from there.
Yep.
Huge sheep population though. And
yes.
I missed a cranker 2 years ago. So anyways, it's kind of like been on my mind. So I'm going to go back with a buddy and hunt for a week. And yeah, so I'm going to do that. And then back here in Montana and try to, I got a place to go hunt that for us, it's that Thanksgiving week. So like that from like the 22nd to almost the end of November is kind of my whitetail season this year. And then that's it. My season's kind of over. A little bit shorter, maybe not shorter, but less hunts than normal. But yeah, so I'm kind of depressed about that too. So I'm trying to like stay focused. But what about you, man? I mean, congrats on the elk, by the way.
Thank you very much, man.
Like, I don't think people realize who haven't done it, or maybe people that did it and found very quick success, like what a big deal that is. Like I tell guys when they do it, and listen, I don't care if they shoot, a cow or a spike or, a 6x6. I'm like, to do that, to kill any elk is just such an accomplishment. So yeah, congrats, man. I didn't know it had taken you so long, which makes it even better.
Yeah, it was like I'd had this success. It took me 5 years to take my first one with a bow, and that was down in New Mexico, also solo, great experience. But like for me, there's always a little bit of an asterisk on that hunt because yeah, it was public land and yeah, it was a draw tag, but I mean, it's Unit 36 in New Mexico. Like you can't throw a rock without hitting something that's bugling in the middle of September. And from a guy from BC, like it was like Disneyland. Like I'd never even seen anything like that in my life. So I do feel like, yeah, there's just a little bit of a check mark beside that one for me. And to have never got it done at home, like everybody's going to have their own definition of hunter. And it doesn't really bother me however other people think about it. But for me, my ultimate goal is to get dropped off. I'd be the type of guy who get dropped off anywhere on the planet and within 2 weeks come out with something on my back. And to not be able to kill an elk after so long in my own backyard. Like, I try not to be an egotistical guy, but you start taking a hit, man. It's like,
oh, you do.
Do I just suck at this? Like, it's this cognitive dissonance. Like, I work hard, I'm smart, I'm fit, I should be successful, and yet there's this continued lack of success that stares you in the face, and it's like, yeah, one of those perspectives has to change. Either I'm not as good as I think I am, or I need to get, I need to find some success. And it's got to be up there, man. Is it the most rewarding kill of my life. I think it might be.
That's awesome.
When the new ones happen, I think they all kind of feel like that when it's like a big struggle or something you've worked for a long time. But yeah, there was just so much, build up for that. And then last day, and like, I didn't get 20, but it was my 16th day of hunting that season. The wife had let me turn around and go back out for another week. Like, it was like Hail Mary mission type shit. You know what I mean?
Which makes it even better.
Yeah. It was pretty rewarding, man.
I don't want to derail your podcast, but I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments on your fitness and nutrition for those hunts, just because of the bodybuilding you've been doing, and if the two are oil and water, or if they actually kind of worked together, and kind of what your thoughts were on that. We don't have to go into that now, but I was curious about that when
I'm happy to.
Yeah, when I saw you, and I'm like, okay, well, let's see how this works out. Apparently it's worked out okay.
So I think in the long run, it worked out okay. I think there was a very significant period for almost 2 years where I was extremely suboptimal. I can remember us having to swap out a pair of XL Fanatic bibs for double XL Fanatic bibs.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, I was a big boy, man, like 270 pounds. I remember when I blew through those MSR snowshoes on my goat hunt, I was 260, Pack was 90. So it's 350 pounds on those snowshoes. And I remember talking to MSR afterwards because they were just destroyed. And they were just like, dude, you're not, like, that's not what they're meant for. And I'm like, well, your website says 300 pounds plus. So I'd look at adjusting your copy. And they did replace them. But they asked me very politely to not ask for another pair if these ones, and I was like, that's fair. In hindsight is one of those things. Like, in hindsight, there was a different way to go about doing this that would have been a longer, safer, more effective method. And if it was in my 20s or my 30s, that's what I would have done. But I'm 44 this year, and I knew I had like a 3 to 4 year window. I've been lifting for 20 years. I've always wanted to do a bodybuilding show. I just, finances and time. And I worked in forestry for 15 years. I worked 10 and 4s in the bush. Like, even just the regularity of being able to go to the gym 5 days a week, 12 months a year, uninterrupted, was just not a reality in my life. And so the stars all aligned, and I was like, okay, I got to do this, the fastest way possible. And that involved getting really big and definitely carrying around more body fat than I should have. So those early phases, there was a lot of hunts where it was really uncomfortable, packing around way too much body fat. Luckily, I'm a bit of a grinder anyways, so it wasn't like I still did what I did. But like, I know, for instance, that goat hunt, I'm not going to say I would have killed a goat if I was lighter, but I definitely put did my chances decrease by 10 to 15% because I just simply wasn't as mobile. And then once the snowshoes started to go, that really limited my options, because I'm like, I got to stay in the valley floors unless I see something, because I can't take these things way up in that nonsense unless I really know it's the only time I'm going up. Now, all that being said, something very interesting is kind of occurred. Like, I'd always heard the philosophy of like a set point. Like, your body has a certain metabolic happy place. Like, some guys are going to be a little bit thicker, some guys are going to be a little bit thinner, some guys are going to carry body fat here. And if you just kind of eat a normal diet and do a regular amount of exercise, your body's going to kind of like suck back to this point on a regular basis. And I believe that. And then some people would offer the theory that you can change that if you exist at another place long enough. And one of the things that I've noticed, so then I go through this insane drastic cut. And I lose 60 pounds in 6 months. I go from 62 pounds because I was 271 in January and I walked on stage in July at 209. Like,
wow.
The goal was sub 5% body fat. I didn't get quite that low, but I was like sub 7. And I mean a real 7, not a bullshit caliper 7. Like, and then I had a sheep hunt 3 weeks after that.
Wow.
And yeah. And so I was able to get a little bit of hiking. I couldn't even really do backpack cardio while I was cutting because it's too intense. Like you're going to have muscular fatigue and you really are trying to, the whole concept of a prep is protecting muscle tissue while losing fat. And you can do that through manipulating diet, PEDs, all kinds of stuff. And so I hadn't done as much cardio. Now, that being said, that sheep hunt, I felt if it was the best feeling hunt I'd had in years, because obviously I was walking around 60 pounds, lighter than before. And what I've noticed since then, like I was never one of those magazine looking dudes. I'd never had a set of abs in my life until I cut for the competition. I've always been a fairly, in shape guy, but not that broad shouldered, bubbly muscle looking magazine cover guy. Just never had that look. I'd always probably walked around at 15% body fat. And now after cutting down that drastically, and I am going to do one more show, so I have been putting back on some weight, but I haven't been insane with my diet since then. I have a base amount of calories that I try and hit, and I have a base amount of protein. And within those windows, I let myself have some flexibility. One of the tips for anybody listening is that if you want to do crazy shit a couple of times a year and you have a family, the rest of the year, you got to be really present and you got to be adaptive to their needs. So my wife likes to go out for dinner. My wife likes me
to that.
Yeah, 100%, right? So even though it's not perfectly optimal, it is in the sense that I need to behave like this in order to have the flexibility to be as obsessed as I need to be later on in the year. But I do feel like my body type has actually physically changed. Like I'm carrying around less fat while still eating a flexible diet. I'm carrying, I'm shaped differently, carrying around a little bit more muscle. And one of the things and I haven't even really shared this, but if nobody's ever done a severe cut, and I'm not saying risk your health, I'm not like you need to do it properly and do your research, but really cutting down once or twice in your life, I think you have the opportunity to kind of readjust your own kind of metabolism and how your body has distributed weight previously. For those guys that just always have that stubborn 20 that never goes away, to really drill down to like a sub 10% body fat and hold it for a couple months, I think there's an interesting experiment to be done there. And I think there's a possibility that you could then, shift your metabolism long term. And I felt great ever since then. So yeah, the long story short is that in the long run, I think it was beneficial, but there was a whole lot of short-term penalty in order to get there from being so heavy.
I'd have just thought going from, that show prep and that restrictive diet and whatever that does to your metabolism and obviously reduced body fat. Yeah, I can understand you feel great hiking around, but almost being, dare I say, untested to go into the mountains on not only maybe even a more severe restricted diet, but calorie wise, but also variety wise, right? Like, and just curious, that's kind of an extreme thing anyway. So you're going from one extreme thing kind of to this other extreme thing in a very short period of time. I didn't realize it was 3 weeks, and that, clearly you performed, but I was curious how that was going to go. Cause I could lay down on the ground and, I've got multiple marathons of fat laying on me, that I could survive off of if I had to, but.
So the funny thing was, because I have food issues. Like I've always been like a bingey type of guy. Like I love my weekends and, ordering a couple pizzas. And I would say, and that was one of the reasons I wanted to try bodybuilding, was because I've never had great discipline with food. And luckily enough, I've just out exercised it. I've just been so physically active that I kind of have stayed ahead of it. But one of the things that I like to pick my weaknesses and the shit that scares me, and I like to see, test myself. And that was a big, I was like, I don't know. And especially I've got a kid and a wife. I'm not some single dude that just gets everything out of the house. Like there's 6 boxes of Oreos upstairs and I'm on prep and you just got to not eat them, And so that was one of the things that really scared me about the prep. And then I'll be honest, I was looking at the sheep hunt as like, oh, I can go kind of off script here for the 3 weeks after the show. Worst case scenario, I'm going to be stuck in the mountains for 2 weeks with 3,500 calories a day, and it'll kind of catch back up to me.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think there was a good mental, like, and this is the other thing that, like, for people who spent a lifetime in the mountains, you can go in there suboptimally and you're so used to being in there that it, like, there isn't that, like, additional novel kind of impact. And so you can go in there, you know, there's guys who should be fitter than they are and they still go kill shit and all that. And I do think the fact that I'd had so much time in the mountains lets me get away with more than I should. And that sheep hunt was definitely an example of that, because it was, your body still hasn't recovered. Like, I would feel good and then I'd hike for an hour and it would just hit me. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
that's what I was wondering, you know, but there's a lot to be said for experience and familiarity. As you mentioned, you know, all those years you'd already spent in the mountains, but no, it's kind of a fascinating experiment.
Yeah. And I think I'm going to do one more, because I still recognize, like, I'm not that old and I still have a lot of really, like, audacious mountain hunting goals. And I recognize that bodybuilding is not the optimal training system to facilitate those.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so.
It's just not, man. Like, when you train legs twice a week, like, the amount you can do backpack cardio is severely limited. Yeah. So I got one more competition in me, and the wife's kind of like, when she lived through prep, she's like, listen, dude, you can do this one more time and then we're done. And I was like, understood. So I got one more, and then I'll switch back, and who knows, maybe I'll try a triathlon or something else that would be more like, I used to compete in jiu-jitsu, and I've been thinking about that again. Like, my cardio for jiu-jitsu was great in the bush. Like, because it was like your whole body, like, I really felt those two things gelled really well together. So maybe I'll get back into that, or just do more of a CrossFit style thing, or just focus more on the backpack cardio. But yeah, it is. They are a little oil and water, to use your words, for sure.
No, it's cool. Yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah, of course. I want to hear a little bit about the new truck rig, because I got to be honest, I'm kind of evaluating, like, different trailer, quad. I'm just picking up a new truck here in a couple weeks, and I'm looking at all my options, and I saw your little video, and I thought that was a really interesting option, potentially.
Yeah, so first let me say that there is no perfect solution or answer. I just know that, you know, for years I kept putting it off, you know, do I buy a trailer? Do I do this? Do I do that? And I just always defaulted maybe to what I knew and was the cheapest option. Was I'd go somewhere, maybe I'd sleep in the back of my truck if I had room. Oftentimes I'd lay in the dirt, throw a tent up. And at a certain point, you're just like, not only are you kind of over it, but I started to realize that, you know, over the course of a long hunt or a season, I'm just not maybe recovering like I needed to, you know, as you get a little older. And so I'd been thinking about it. And so I went antelope hunting for 6 days with a buddy here in Montana, and he had a rig just like that. And he was like on his second sliding camper, pop-up sliding camper. And I lived in that thing for 6 days. And by day 2, I was convinced this was what I needed. And so I ended up getting one right as COVID kicked off. I got lucky. And, you know, I'm spending it. So this is the third season I've had it. I spend at least 30 days a season in it.
Okay.
And, you know, I'll bivvy out if I need to. That's not the issue, but I've got my system dialed. And I tell you, for me, it is about as perfect as I can get, because anywhere I can take that truck, I have my camp. Yep. So I'm really mobile. So I think it depends what kind of hunting you do, what kind of species you pursue. But for me, anywhere I go, I got my camp. It's self-sufficient. And then that swing hitch I got on the back where that rack plugs in and I have the cooler. The thing maybe I didn't mention is with that swing hitch, I still have access to my receiver hitch.
Okay.
So if I choose to, I can hook up a trailer, and I can pull a trailer with an ATV. I can pull a covered trailer with, you know, whatever else I need. And so it still gives me that flexibility if I happen to need more, you know, truck bed space. But man, that thing is just, it's changed the way I've hunted. And then when I come back, even if I'm out for a poor night, I can get a pretty doggone good sleep in, and I'm ready to go the next day. So yeah, for me, it's been awesome. And I just leave the thing in my truck now year round.
Yeah, so when I went up with my dad and brother for our first elk hunt, I took a Seek Outside 12-man teepee, which I loved with the stove. The big learning for me was you got to run low profile cots. I had my old man, so I wanted to bring cots, and we got like the typical Cabela's ones. And just the amount of space they eat up, like I was like, oh, okay, didn't really think this through.
It's like the cot is another person.
100%. Yeah. 100%. And I think next time I do like maybe those Helinox, or because then you'd be able to get right out to the edge. But loved it. It was great. I think it's a strong argument against a wall tent for depending on what your setup is in BC. We made it through weather. We made it through some chilly stuff. Like it was perfect. But when I was headed back up by myself, I knew I wanted to be really mobile. So I'd never gone elk hunting in this particular area. And it's a heavily pressured area. Kind of reminded me of like, certain areas of Montana or Wyoming a little bit. And it's like oil and gas lease land. So there's like roads and quad trails and seismic lines everywhere. Like it's crazy. It's just a mishmash of these things. And there's kind of dudes quadding all over the place. Yeah. Mostly not getting off the quads. Another big takeaway for me is I need a quad next year. Not to hunt from the quad, but there was too many 2-3 mile dead walks to get to the end of the road where everybody else was stopping. And because they bugled the shit out of that road so much, it's like, I know there's nothing on here. I just want to get to the end so I can bail off into the woods. So when I went back up solo myself, I was like, I gotta be mobile. And some of these areas I was hunting were like 2 and 3 hours apart. So my game plan was hunt all day, drive in the dark. If I don't find anything, drive in the dark to the new location. And then same thing, I've got a canopy on the truck and sleep in the canopy on the back of the truck. And technically it worked well. Like it helped me accomplish my goal. But there's a lot of, and I've done sleeping in the back of the truck in the canopy, like between hunts, like on long drives and stuff when you don't got to worry about a hotel, and that's fine. And I've got this really interesting, I got this foam guy to make me this 3-part foam mattress. And he basically, so it's like 3 4-inch thick foam squares that are probably, I don't know, 2 feet by 2 feet. And then he upholsters them together so they fold in like a trifold. And then I just pop that out in the back of the truck and it's like sleeping on a bed. It's beautiful. But it was the condensation in the back of the truck. I was like, I woke up and it was like it had rained inside. It was just wild, man. And I did start to find a happy medium between like how much to leave open and what to leave closed in order to like let some condensation out without all the moisture from outside getting in. But then I was like, I just don't think this is a fantastic long-term, because then you wake up and your sleeping bag is soaking wet and it's like, I can't even pack my stuff up in the morning until I let it dry. And I got home from that and I saw your video. And before that, I'd been thinking like trailer quad combo, and then maybe looking for a smaller trailer that was a toy hauler so I could put the quad in the back of the trailer. But then I was like, oh, you could put one of these in the back of the truck and I could still take the ATV on a little trailer behind me. And that was a really interesting option. It would facilitate that mobility. And I like the idea wherever you get the truck, your camp is there. Yeah.
And especially for elk, because you have to find them, right?
100%.
So, I had buddies hunting out of, a wall tent or something similar, but we'll just call it a fixed camp, and every day they would get up or, every evening, whatever it was, and they'd drive around and they'd find them and then they'd have to leave them and go back.
Yeah.
I was literally camped most nights, not every night, but at least towards the end of the season, I was camped within earshot of bugles all night. I woke up, like, you want to hear the best alarm clock? You wake up to bugles, that'll get you out of bed.
Oh yeah. There's no hitting the snooze button then.
And I could tell where they were, or I could tell the direction they were moving. And then if they weren't there the next day, because I blew them out or whatever, then I'd move and I'd camp again. And so for me, it was, like I said, there's no perfect solution. There's lots of different ways to slice it. But yeah, it's funny because I posted a picture just with that one bull on top of the truck, and nobody commented on the bull, which is totally fine. That really wasn't the intent. But so many people asked me about the camper, and I'm like, all right, I can't keep answering every one of these individually. So I was like, I'll just do a video on it.
Yeah, Drake runs one too, and I've seen his setup.
Oh, dude. So, yeah. So Steven did one. Steven did a video on his a couple years ago. But the reason I'm laughing is, I can think of, I mean, without even putting much effort, I can think of 5 other guys that I know, hunting buddies, and they've all got them.
Yeah.
So, I was kind of the last one to the party there, but yeah, it's to me it was a game changer.
And do you have a specific manufacturer that you like, or is there a few different ones out there kind of making?
There are a few different ones. The ones that 4 out of the 5 guys have is called 4-wheel pop-up campers. They're out of Cali, California. That's where they're made. They've been making them since like 1976.
Okay.
And the thing I like about them, and I'm sure there's others, but the thing I liked about them was not only the longevity, but the lightweight qualities of that slide in. So mine's a fairly basic model. It's less than 1,000 pounds. And
That's
so
nice.
that rides around in my truck, and my truck doesn't even know it's there. Like, I maybe lost a gallon, per mile or something like that.
And with the cost of fuel these days, that's a legitimate concern.
Yeah. No, it is. And, it's a one-piece construction, and they've got great customer service, but most people say they've never leaked. And so that was all those things I was kind of looking for.
Okay.
But yeah, that's the one I ended up getting. There are a few others. There's so many, like, I live we're near Bozeman, Montana. So like, it's kind of become the heart of pop-up roof tent, and I see buddies with those, and nothing against it, because everybody's got to figure it out for themselves. I am so glad I did not do that.
Yeah, I feel the same.
I have nothing against sleeping in a tent, but you're still sleeping in a tent. I still got to pop it up. You still got to put everything in there. You still got to break it down. You have the condensation, the whole thing.
Yeah.
The nice thing about those is most of the time, you do still have your truck bed.
Right.
I've figured out ways around that. Right. So, so that's
cool. Appreciated. Food for thought. All right, let's skip over to Whitetail, which I know is one of your passions and possibly your first hunting passion.
Well, it's what I grew up doing. Miserably unsuccessful, but it's what I grew up doing, and so every November I can't wait to do it again.
And this is a relatively new obsession for me. So up until last year, the only whitetail hunting I'd ever done, I did a guided elk hunt in Montana years ago, when there was a couple nights where there's just with the weather and everything, there's not much point in going out. Do you want to go sit a stand for whitetail? And literally sat in some farmer's field on an old double wide, ladder stand, with a rifle, and with a bow, and saw half a dozen little whitetails running around. So that's all I'd done. And then last year, there was this outfitter who unfortunately passed away like a week before my hunt, and his wife still had me up and everything, but he's a bit of a landmark in kind of, British Columbia outfitter lore. But he had this like whitetail meat hunt. It was like $2,500. I've been thinking of doing it forever. You can actually take 2 whitetails in that region. You can take 1 buck and 1 doe. And it was in like the first 2 weeks of December, when there's really nothing else going on. And so I was like, let's go do this. This would be a nice way to, and it was just a 3-day hunt. So the wife was okay with it. And that was the first real stand hunting I did. And I was doing half-day sits for the first 2 days. And then when we got to the last day, I was like, because they were dropping me off with a quad at the stand, I was like, just drop me off. I'll send you a text, or just come at dark, because it's the last day. I'm just going to sit in this thing the whole day. And I just fell in love with it, man. Like, it was just a whole different kind of challenge. And I feel like historically, I'm not going to say Western hunters have kind of looked down on, the whitetail stand, hunting community. But I think there's been this lack of understanding about the difficulty level, because there isn't this like visually impressive, I'm hiking over mountains and I'm doing crazy shit. But I think learning the country, and especially like guys who either have leases or their own properties, and they're like figuring out food plots and all this shit, like the amount of strategy and then setting up different stands and thinking about different winds and knowing where to go. in the morning, and then the patience to be able to like, and that was one of the things that surprised me, because you think that like aggressive elk encounter is like really cool, but then there's this polar opposite where there's this like intimacy of a whitetail encounter. Like I get just as close, but it's perfectly silent. You just maybe hear some crunching in the snow or the leaves. He doesn't know you're there. Like, and it was just so different. And so that last year I decided, okay, I need to squeeze in some type of stand hunting once a year, because this is just a whole different discipline that I'd never been exposed to before.
Wow, I think you summarized whitetail hunting, the dichotomy between that and Western hunting, very well. I didn't know that you were relatively new to it. I agree to you, or I agree with you that, coming out west, like I spent, while I grew up in Ohio, and then even no matter where I was in the world, like I would go to the Midwest and try to whitetail hunt every year if I could, right?
Yep.
Kansas and Nebraska and, Iowa, Illinois, all those places, all those kind of iconic places. And then I came to Montana, and when I get to Montana, it's like mule deer, elk, like that's what I want to do. And what I realized is, Montana's got some incredible whitetail hunting. And I've been going to the Midwest. Even when I moved to Montana, I was still going to the Midwest, and I still will, but man, the opportunities here are amazing. But it is looked upon a little different, but the cross-pollination that is now occurring in the hunting world, where east is going west, west is going east, north is going south, etc. I think it's making people appreciate the discipline, or disciplines, whatever it may be. And I think people are becoming better hunters because of it. For me personally, we talk about that, almost postpartum depression from elk season being over. But as the days get shorter and the temperatures get cooler, I can't wait to get in a tree stand. And I'm not saying it's easier. Physically, it's easier. I think mentally it's almost tougher to whitetail hunt, right?
Yeah.
I've never had the opportunity, except for 3 years. Me and two Navy buddies had a lease in northern Missouri. We had a farm that we leased. It was so far away we couldn't go there and do the standard, put a food plot in, run the trail cameras, etc. But at least it was as close as I'd ever been to that. And what I realized is, when I elk hunt, it's like when the season's over, okay, I can train again, I can hike, I can shoot, but it's just prep. When guys are really into whitetail hunting, it becomes a year-round thing. Yeah. They're managing the land, like their hands are in the soil. They got camera pictures of the deer, and I think the word you used is so, spot on. And so, there's something about it, and that dichotomy between this screaming bull elk, and you have to be super aggressive sometimes, and physically demanding, and then you sit quiet and still and can't move, and you can't do anything to generate body heat, and then you're hoping that all the research and information you gathered and the chess match you're playing, that this thing's going to walk by within bow range. Like it's a fascinating thing, and it's incredible. I mean, the animals themselves are so utterly different. I mean, whitetails don't put up with anything,
No.
So it's an interesting thing, but I know you guys got big deer. I know where you're headed. That general area's got big deer.
Yeah, there's a very real
there, I'm sure. But
I've been getting a couple 170, 175 picks, and he's like, there's bigger floating around out there. Like we could run into something. And it's an any weapon season. And this is an interesting. And he said, are you bringing a rifle? And I said, no. And I've recently gone through this. I don't know if you call it like an epiphany or a revelation. And I'll just be honest. Bow hunting has always been my first true love. And then as I was growing Mindful Hunter and the podcast and everything, more rifle hunts just start to creep in, because the bottom line is success grows in this world we live in. Yeah. And you kind of forget why you started this in the first place. And then I had rifle hunted my first hunt of the season for elk. And then it was a buddy of mine up north. And he's like, listen, man, I know this is counterintuitive, but I'm going to strongly recommend you bring your bow for your second hunt. And he's a trad guy. And I hadn't even made arrows for the season. I was a little rusty. I was like, but something clicked, and I was like, all right, I start building arrows, and no word of a lie, I got like a little choked up because there's something about the connection. Like I'm sitting there in the arrow saw and I'm cutting them and I'm gluing in my inserts and I'm sharpening my broadheads. And it was like, where has this been? My rifle I take out once a year and I drop a half a dozen rounds down range and it sits in a box and it never moves. And that's just the way it is because I'm not one of those gun nut guys. And I've got gun nut buddies and I love them to death. It's just not my passion. And I just really like found like I felt like at home. And then the moment I got out of the truck with the bow in the hand, it was like, oh, that's what I've been looking for. This is what I need as a hunter to feel like I'm home. And so he's like, are you going to bring a rifle? I'm like, no. And he's like, you're going to, if 180 walks by at a couple hundred yards, you're going to kick yourself. And I'm like, I think I'm okay, man. Like I would rather go home empty than, and this is the thing, and I don't want to call people out, but like, I think when you, I'm a burn the ships kind of guy. I think when you have a back door, are you really committed to the goal that you set out? And he's like, well, you just take one up in the stand with you. And then, and I'm like, I don't think so, man, because that just says something about the commitment. And I do believe there's like this convince the universe you're committed to your goal. And I'm not a big woo-woo fluff guy, but like, I can't argue that shit just kind of starts to happen and open up for you when you become insanely committed to a goal. And so I was like, yeah, man, then so be it. You know what I mean? If I go home with a 140 with a bow instead of a 180 with the rifle, then I'm a happy guy. Like that's the way I want this to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a different, I haven't rifle hunted in, I don't even know how long, a long time. But I do remember the feeling, and it's a different feeling when you walk outside with a rifle in your hand than when you walk out with a bow in your hand. And neither's right or wrong.
Yep.
But for me, and maybe part of it is I've hunted a while. I certainly, haven't. I could go elk hunt. I could literally go elk hunt right now in Montana.
Yep.
I could pick up a rifle and go outside today and continue to elk hunt. And I just told you I'm depressed because elk season's over. Because to me, I'm not ever going to pursue them with a rifle. That's just a personal choice, right?
Yeah.
But there is that connection. And listen, for me anyways, like we talked about the whitetail hunter and getting his hands in the dirt and the, the whole year-round process. For me, like that's with me in archery. Yeah. Like I'm constantly tweaking and tuning and shooting and trying to get better. And, you have to make your stalking better so you can get closer and all these kind of things. And so I just love that. So that's kind of my year-round kind of passion as far as hunting goes. But yeah, it's there's nothing, I have nothing against any of it.
No, me neither. And I do think it's that, yeah.
But I think you're right. I have early on when I was kind of going through my transition, so to speak, where you'd have both in your hand and you're like at a certain point, if you're going to make the commitment, you got to leave one behind.
I'm actually going through this decision with my goat hunt this year. So I pulled not like a great goat tag, but like a decent goat tag up north this year. And I'm going to go back
in
up
the winter. In the winter.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, that's a different thing, man. Like,
yeah.
Well, for a lot of reasons. One, I think it depends on, potentially how many of a species have you killed?
Yeah.
Or
which is none at this point.
Yeah, but right. Or how difficult is it going to be? And, how many more of those trips do you have in you before you can't go back for whatever reason?
Yep.
So yeah, I think that has to be part of the calculus for sure.
Yep. I agree. It's also, I do kind of feel differently about going into new terrain just at my skill level. Like there's goat country that's not bow huntable just because of the way that it's laid out. Maybe for like, a guy like Foss or Warren, there's not too many places that aren't, but for like us mere mortals, let's just say there's certain terrain that certainly lends itself to bow hunting goats more than others. Absolutely. And the fact that I've never been in this unit before, I'm trying to get somebody on the phone who's been there just to say like, am I being an idiot? Like, am I just basically going up there with zero chance because of how severe it is? But anyways, that's kind of off topic.
The first and last mountain goat I ever shot with a rifle was in Alaska. Was at 14 yards. And I said, I will never do this again. Yeah. Well, I will never shoot a mountain goat with a rifle again. I was trying to think that maybe, I don't think that was the last thing I ever shot with a rifle, but that was one of the last. And I was like, I'll never do this again because this species in this terrain, I don't need to.
Yeah.
You know, I can just, you can move around in it. But you're very right. And especially in the late season with all that snow,
Yeah.
you know, is it going to be crunchy? Would you be able to even get close? Like, there's so many things you have to consider. You know, maybe it's worth you getting one under your belt. It's still going to be a hell of an adventure, no matter what.
Yep. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm leaning at this point. And this tag isn't impossible to draw. Like I could probably get it every 4 or 5 years. It's that kind of thing. So to go in there the first year with the rifle and kind of figure things out, and then maybe look at it for a bow hunt in the future is definitely. But I'm on this like archery high right now, so I'm like, let's let that calm down a little bit and see how I feel come December when there's 3 feet of snow on the ground.
I've killed 5 mountain goats with a bow, all in the snow, all late season, because just a tag I would draw. And I'm trying to think. I think 3 out of the 5 were maybe solo. No, nothing like what you're doing. Like nothing as far as the remoteness or anything like that. But the snow, the avalanche conditions, the noise, the danger just inherent to the environment. Like to me, it's the most challenging hunt in North America, a late season mountain goat hunt. And I don't care.
It's the most technically challenging hunt I've ever done, from like gear to navigation to survival to all of it. Like how to pick your shelter, how to pick your, it's funny you're converting me. I'm just about 100% synthetic now, going from pretty damn close 3 years ago from being 100% natural, like talking merino base layers to down sleeping bag and everything in between. And now I still have one down quilt that I think has its place for certain hunts. But other than that, everything's synthetic. I was like, yeah, you spit some truth on that one for sure.
Everything has its place. Let's just say that. Right. Yeah. And so I think if you want to try to be as well-rounded as you can be, I was thinking about this before we jumped on. It wasn't about the podcast, but I was just thinking about, you always have to be open to new ideas.
Yeah.
And I think if you're not, even if you're like super experienced, I just think you're leaving something on the table. You at least have to be open to the ideas. So no, it's great to hear. I think synthetic definitely has its place. Maybe
especially
when you're
BC,
there,
man. Like it's so wet, and the condensation. Wet. Even that, I had my synthetic quilt in the back of that truck, and if I'd had my down quilt, it would have been nuked after the first night. Like it was just, like there really is. And I'm actually experimenting. So my first winter goat hunt, I took the Kafaru 0 degree slick bag, which is kind of like a tank. Do you know what I mean? Like you are taking just you are going to be safe. It's
indestructible.
100%. And it weighs 5 pounds or some ridiculous thing. And so I was trying to craft lightweight options, and my favorite my favorite quilt company is Enlightened Equipment. And I think they only make, it's a 20 degree, it's like -6 or 7 Celsius, which I think would be a 20 degree Fahrenheit bag. That's the biggest, like the warmest synthetic quilt that they make. But I'm going to pair that with a Sea to Summit liner that should get me about another 7 or 8 degrees centigrade. And I figured that with my puffy stuff, even if I see, -20 Celsius, -25, I should be okay. And I'm less than half of the weight of what the slick bag was. And I should say all of that is on top of like a high-end winter pad. I wouldn't recommend taking a quilt unless you got like an R-value 7+ pad. So that'll be an interesting experiment this year.
What shelter?
So this is interesting. Previously, I've run the Solo. I'm considering, just because, with the gear reviews and the channel and stuff, I'm thinking maybe about the Stone Glacier Solus 1P. Just because it's a new one and people are going to be interested in it, and it would give me an opportunity to like really put a new piece of gear through the paces.
Set it up. I just set it up 2 weeks ago.
What do you think?
I think it's a nice tent. The only thing I would not caution you on, but just mention to you is, because it's a later season hunt and you might have snow, there's 2 tiny vestibules off each side. Yeah. And there's kind of an interesting way to access them. But it's not like one big vestibule. So, I think you could put like maybe rifle inside your tent.
Yeah.
Pack, boots on one side, stove, food bag on the, you could
Yeah.
run it like that. But I think it's got its place. But the reason I mentioned that, I've actually got an article coming out in, well, probably next week in my November newsletter about sleep systems. And, I've talked about this before, maybe you and I have talked about it, but your thinking is spot on in the sense that you're building it as a system.
Yeah.
You're not looking at just the bag, right? Or just the pad, or, just the shelter. You have to look at it together. So the pad's going to get you warmth. The liner is going to get you warmth. The tent is going to get you warmth. All that combined, then you factor in your clothing, like all that's going to get you warmth.
Yeah.
And so, if you're going to 0 degrees, you don't necessarily need a 0 degree bag.
Yeah.
You need a system that's going to get you to 0 or -10 or whatever the case may be. But yeah, I think I think your thinking there is correct, because you got to give up some weight and bulk somewhere.
Yep.
You don't want to give up your safety to get there, but I think you're not giving up safety. I think you're just being calculated.
Yeah, it's that multiple use kind of scenario.
Yeah,
Because I do feel like, and that's what I felt like last time. I thought it was overkill. Like I was getting in this bag, and both me and you are very strong proponents of climbing in the bag wet. And I'll say that Kafaru bag did that. Like I was getting in there sopping wet with multiple layers. And it was terribly uncomfortable, but every couple hours I would wake up, I'd strip the outer layer off because it had dried out, and by 3 o'clock in the morning, I was down in my base layer and everything was nicely folded up and sitting in my dry bag ready to get put back on in the morning. And that was a really nice feeling, but it was also my puffy layers were just sitting there doing nothing. And I was like, I'm overgunned here. Do you know what I mean? Like there's no need to have both of these. And if I have to have those, because throughout the day I'm going to need to be wearing them, then I should also have these, or I should be compensating for that with my sleep system.
But that's what I think experience in the environment gets you as well.
Yeah.
Right. And the more times, if you did that 20 years in a row, you'd have a system that was so impeccably dialed.
Yeah.
Right. So
I'm a little bit cautious about switching shelters. So I did this big tent review this year. In my opinion, the Sitka Summit Tellus won my review. It's a very interesting design. Really like the shelter. Took it on my sheep hunt. Leaked like a sieve.
Ooh.
First night, it's literally like I've got GoPro footage of it just running down through the roof. And I don't want to jump to any conclusions and shit all over Sitka Summit because they make really nice stuff, and it's very possible this was just a one-off scenario. And I shipped it back and they weren't able to replicate it. They shipped me a new tent anyways, which I have yet to test. But I'm hesitant on running a new shelter in such severe conditions because I just got bit in the ass. I feel a little bit more confident because it's Stone Glacier, and I know a bunch of people will have already run this particular unit through its paces. And I think, but no matter what shelter I go with, I'm going to have to do some pre-setup testing because that was a fail. The lab or whatever kind of backyard testing I did with the Sitka Summit and some water hoses clearly wasn't sufficient enough to test it in the extremes that I was going to experience. And it was like just sideways rain on that sheep hunt for the first couple days.
Yeah, which you're probably not going to get on a late season goat hunt, but without having a vestibule coming off the front of that stone to cover up, there's a little awning, but like to cover up the front door and the entrance.
Yeah.
And we didn't have one, but I think you could probably, the guy I was with said you could get a vestibule to go over the front of it, but it's just something you need to consider because you're getting in and out of the tent, and then the vestibules are on the side, and the vestibules, at least when we set it up, don't come all the way down to the ground. So, I don't think it's going to leak, but you just have to figure out, like, if you get in and out in a snowstorm, like, you're going to be bringing snow in and out, right? I mean, it's inevitable anyways, but, and then that snow is going to melt. So, yeah.
Well, this was always my argument.
But you're a big guy like me, so it's going to be a one-person tent for you.
Yeah.
Whereas the solo's kind of like with the shape, it's kind of like one, and then I still have some room inside.
Yes.
Like in that little apex there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it would be, you're probably, I don't know, probably saving a pound off the solo, if I remember the specs correct.
Yeah, and that was the reason I opted for the Solo over the Una, because the Una had the bigger space inside, but it has zero vestibule whatsoever.
Yeah.
You can kind of
Yeah.
detach one corner and jimmy rig one, but
Yeah.
the other thing that I'd considered, because I've fallen in love with this Z-Packs 7x9 Dyneema tarp. It literally weighs 5 ounces, and I never take it out of my pack anymore. I love this thing. And last time I was on the goat hunt, I was thinking to myself, because I wasn't moving camp a whole lot once I got in there, I was like, I think I'm gonna, next time I do this, I'm gonna set up my 7x9 tarp off the front of
hell yeah.
of my shelter, because
Dude, if you do that, I would have no problem bringing the stone. You'll have more than enough room. You'll be able to protect the front door. I mean, if you're not going anywhere, you're already carrying it. That's a great idea.
Yeah. I'll play around with it a little bit more. Okay, I know we're creeping on time here, and we haven't even touched whitetail gear yet. But this is actually really well timed, because you just put up a post yesterday. So for anybody who's listening to this, go to John's Instagram. It's J Barklow, all one word. And you put up a screenshot of two lists, or like one list and 2 screenshots. That's your. Yeah. But let's just talk your approach in general to whitetail gear.
Yeah, so for whitetail, there's really 2 distinct phases of the hunt. The first one is what I call a commute. So it's getting from your insert point, being the truck, the ATV, whatever it may be. From there, commuting to the stand. So when you're commuting to the stand, you want to be dressed, the term is comfortably cool, right? So you want to be dressed so you're not sweating. Why? The reason you don't want to sweat is because when you get to the stand, you are going to be stationary. You're not going to be able to move, do jumping jacks, et cetera, to generate body heat. And, going back to the base layer conversation, if those layers are wet, and depending on what those layers are that you choose, that dampness, when you become static very abruptly, is going to make you chilled. And as soon as you get chilled, your body's going to start to shiver. That shivering is going to burn calories, and you might as well start to stopwatch, because if the system doesn't dry quick, you're going to burn all your calories. You're going to go into a deficit. You're not going to stay warm, and you're going to leave the stand.
Yep.
So you dress for the commute, and then when you get to the stand, you want to, if you can build an efficient system, you want to dress now for what I call the sit. And if the system is kind of built that way, then you can merely add layers on top of what you wore for the commute. And at this point, the sit is all about being very stingy with body heat. So your body, your internal combustion engine, that metabolic engine is that heat source. And so that heat source is, driven by the calories you put inside. So going back to the conversation on nutrition. And as that body heat pumps out, you want to capture as much of it, and that's going to keep you warm. And so if you walk, as we often, I have in the past, I see people do it all the time, where they dress for the sit, but they use or wear that system for the commute, because they're like, well, it's only 300 yards. It's only a quarter mile. I'm only going to ride, a bike a mile down the road, and then it stands right off the road. And they get sweaty because those insulated systems we wear for the sit are really not intended to breathe. They're just intended to trap heat, not let heat escape. They get there, they're sweated up, they unzip the front, they try to dump heat, but they're wet in their groin, they're wet under their armpits, they're wet on the back of their neck. They climb up in the stand, they start to shiver, they lose mental focus. And it's just kind of a miserable experience. And maybe the deer of their lifetime walks by and they can't even shoot accurately because, they're shivering so damn hard. So that's happened to me before. So there's 2 distinct phases, and that's how you want to build your clothing system. And then once you're there, then, and this is, I know is somewhat controversial, but for me anyways, it's about fueling that metabolic engine. If you're going to sit there all day, to continue to generate that heat that's continually being trapped, because eventually it's going to escape, right?
Sure.
And so that's the way you build that system with, think about it almost as baffles, or the way you'd build a house where heat's eventually going to radiate and escape from the house. You want to be as efficient with that loss of heat as you can be.
No, that makes perfect sense. So let's walk through, I would say, what would be your approach for the stand component for like a moderately cold, like we're going to say early November. So let's say, like 20 degrees Fahrenheit, as far as what you would be wearing in the actual stand for that portion of it. What are some of the pieces of kit you would select?
Yeah, so at that point, you'd be wearing the whole system, right? So I'd have base layer top and bottom.
Yeah.
Can be synthetic or wool, shooter's choice. I would have on, and this is where I might differ a little bit. Well, I probably differ a lot, maybe from some people, but going back to the being stingy with giving up body heat and building these baffles within a system, I'm a huge proponent of wind stopper or wind stopping layers. So generally over top, if it's something in those 20s or below, I've got a wind stopper vest on, and I probably have either wind stopper shorts or wind stopper pants, and they can be paneled wind stopper. And so that's going to help keep my body heat up as I'm commuting back and forth to the stand, but then it easily layers over top. And then depending on how cold it is getting to the stand, I may or may not have like a mid layer. So think like an ambient hoodie or something like that. So something breathable, quiet. But once I get there, I think in the outer layers, having wind stopper in the outer layers is also critical. So anything that's got fleece is kind of a must to keep the noise down. I'm wearing, a wind stopper fleece, and depending on how cold it is, right at 20 is about my breaking point where I can maybe go insulated wind stopper fleece or non-insulated wind stopper fleece.
Okay.
If I put the mid layer top on, maybe I don't need the insulated wind stopper, and so I'll run like something like a Stratus. I think if it starts to dip below 20s, especially when the wind is up, I'll revert to something like a Fanatic, right?
Okay.
Which is crazy warm.
Yeah.
And I know you know this, but the one distinct difference between a whitetail system and a big game system is that if you or I are sitting around on top of a mountain glassing or in camp and I start getting cold, I can stand up. I can walk around. I can do jumping jacks. I can start a fire. I can do all these things to create body heat or to help with that body heat. When you're in a stand, if you want to be successful, you can't move. And so you're relying solely on that not just the body heat, but then what you have on top of that to kind of insulate yourself from that. So yeah, I'm running right at that 20 degree is kind of that breaking point. To me, the couple other critical things are you have to wear a beanie or a toque to trap the heat from it radiating from the top of your head. I think a hood works. Oftentimes whitetail hunting, I feel a little claustrophobic with the hood on, but I definitely have a beanie. And then if I have a hood, just pulling that hood up around my neck or having a neck gaiter is just comfortable, that you don't have that wind blowing on the back of your neck. And then the other thing is your feet. And so oftentimes these tree stand platforms are just grates. They're made of aluminum usually. And so a piece of old carpet or a piece of ground pad that you can stand on to insulate yourself from that cold metal grate, all these things are going to start working in conjunction, just like your sleeping system we discussed, to help keep you warmer on stand, right?
Right.
The one thing I would, and I know we're kind of talking about clothing, but I answered a question for a guy probably last night where, he said, well, I'd put on my gear list, 400 gram insulated leather boots. I'm not a huge proponent of rubber boots, but to each his own. The thing I don't like about rubber boots is that they don't breathe. And so you could be dressed perfectly suitably for the commute, you put a 400 or 800 or 1600 gram rubber boot on your foot and you walk to the stand, your feet, almost assuredly your socks are going to be damp. And so hopefully you're running a quality wool sock. That's going to help. But that damp atmosphere, similar to the truck bed, under the cap of your truck, is going to be damp in there. Your feet are going to start to get cold over time. So I think it's important to try to limit that. So you could certainly change socks at the base of the tree if you had the wherewithal to do that, or the time. You could wear maybe a Gore-Tex insulated boot that has some breathability, and at a minimum, what the moisture does is just go into the insulation. Maybe it doesn't go all the way through the boot, but it's at least away from your foot. But then you insulate yourself again from that metal platform for conductive heat loss. And you put all this together and you start to have a system where, because it's kind of a ridiculous activity, let's be honest. Yeah. You're going to walk out in the dark. You're going to climb up in a tree 15, 20, 25 feet up, right? And then you're literally going to stand or sit there motionless and just observe nature, which is super cool, but it really drives a very distinct problem that you have to try to solve for with not just clothing, but all these other things I discussed.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a very unique situation to try and solve. How do you approach the psychology of, I actually find myself getting anxious when I think about having to sit still all day and not that I talk a lot, but I like to either, be on my phone or like I'm a big, I'm constantly kind of fidgeting or doing something. Do you have any mental tips or, how do you approach that part of it? Because I do think, you had mentioned that potentially, one argument is that mentally the whitetail hunt can be harder than a Western big game hunt. And I believe inaction mentally is harder than action. Like, I think it's easier to make ourselves do something than to make ourselves not. Dieting is a great example. I think going to exercise is easier than dieting because one is a restrictive activity and one is not. But how do you approach that? Or is that something you find yourself naturally good at?
I probably am better at it now than I was in my 20s. That's maybe just, I don't know, maturity, or I don't know what that may be, or just a calmness. Hopefully for me, I've had a really aggressive, active, maybe big game season.
Yeah.
Elk, mule deer, antelope leading up to this. And so believe me, I love whitetail hunting. So this is not a diminishment, but I almost look forward to almost using a whitetail stand to recover.
Right.
But not just mentally, or not just physically recover, but mentally recover. And so I take a wet notes pad with me everywhere anyways. You could certainly do it on your phone. I almost try to keep my mind from thinking about certain things and saving these topics up for when I'm sitting in the whitetail stand.
Oh, I like this.
Right. So it's like, I'm thinking about my next course I'm building.
Yep.
I'm gonna try to wait until I'm sitting in that whitetail stand, and that's what I'm going to occupy my mind with. And I'm going to take notes, and I'm going to hopefully, if I never kill a deer, come out of there with some rock solid notes about what that next course is, right? Or whatever it may be, or trying to figure out, I'm going to build this big kind of intricate workbench in my garage this winter, like kind of thinking through that and what that may look like. And it's like every time my mind wanders to that, I'm like, no, put that aside, save that for whitetail season. And so that's what I try to do, is like have these things that I know it's going to sound insane, Jay, but like that I almost am looking forward to thinking about when I get in the stand. And that's not to say that I'm distant from the hunt, but let's be honest, like you sit there, nothing walks by, a bunch of squirrels fuck with you. Like you got to have something to occupy your mind. And, I try not to, sometimes you don't have coverage anyways, but I try not to drift off and, check email or go to Instagram, just because that's inevitably when my one opportunity this season's going to happen.
Of course.
But if I can occupy my mind with these other things, and that's what I try to do, right? And then listen, there's a certain part where you're just like, you know what? Goddamn, like there's 2 more hours left till prime time, and I'm just going to sit here and grind it out. And that is going to be my challenge for the day, is to sit here quiet, still, and just grind it out. And that's where the psychology comes in. Like, it is mentally, you get done with a whitetail hunt, you haven't really done a lot physically, especially compared to like chasing elk. Why are you so tired? Why are you so wiped out? Why are you so drained? Well, psychologically, you've just roasted yourself, right? So that's the bigger challenge for me is trying to figure that out. So that's kind of the way I approach it.
I love that, man. I love the, so me and my business partner, because we do these kind of like really intricate, projects that are like really complicated problem solving about, kind of human behavior and lots of academic research and stuff. And after a while, we had to realize that there's 2 types of work we do. There's deep work and there's shallow work. The deep work I do, which is the complicated problem solving, and I'm sure this happens in product design. I have some product designers as clients, so I know it does. But if I don't have a 3 or 4 hour uninterrupted window, I don't start deep work because it takes a little while to get into it. It takes some time to execute it, and then it takes a little while to come up out of it because there's these mental switching costs. So like phone has to get shut off, kid has to be at school. But it's funny because I do have some like personal passion projects and other things that I'm getting into that like require a lot of brainstorming and like thinking through things. And that's a great idea to keep a little list on the phone of like 2 or 3 concepts. And they're enjoyable to think about. So it is almost like this, I'm looking forward to contemplating this for a couple hours in the stand.
Yeah. And how lucky are we, right? Like how fortunate are we to have this activity we love to do that in today's day and age provides us those hours of calmness, of stillness, of quietness, right?
Yeah.
Where, like you said, kids got to be out of the house, phone has to be turned off, all those kind of things. We're kind of forcing ourselves into that. And so, trying to take advantage of that is a real benefit. And then, because you're right, without that, like I can't start thinking about, what we're going to build 3 years from now and all the complexity of what that may entail. The other thing I try to do is, I mentioned, depending on how long I'm sitting, I will eat in the stand. I will try to have a cadence or a schedule of that. And so it's like, I've got a 2-hour block between my next feeding schedule, which I'm not that way in my daily life as far as the feeding schedule, but it's like something to look forward to, fueling the engine. I'm like, I got solid 2 hours to think about this before it's time to do this other thing.
Yep.
And then it's back to doing, maybe 2 more hours or whatever it is.
Yep.
And so I just try to build that. It sounds weird, but I try to build that discipline into sitting in the stand. And honestly, because you only do it for, a short amount of time every year, I look forward to it.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to respect your time, John. So we've already gone over an hour. It's been super enlightening.
We've been all over the place.
Yeah,
it's been awesome.
Yeah, I had an idea of where we were going to go, and we didn't even hit that till halfway through. But that's fantastic. I love a good organic
we haven't caught
conversation.
Up in a while, so
no,
you gotta catch up and BS and tell hunting stories.
100%, especially this time of year.
Yeah.
So before we go, I know you got a couple cool things on the horizon. Let everybody know, like newsletter, where to catch up, and the kind of things that are coming down the pipe.
Yeah. So for those that don't know, you mentioned it already. My Instagram page is J Barklow, and it's not, you're not going to see pictures of my cat or, my wife's birthday cake. It's basically every week I'm trying to put one thing out to just educate or inform people that are going outdoors, specifically hunters, but it could be applied to anything. I've got a website, knowledgefromstorms.com. There's a bunch of information on there. I have a monthly newsletter that you can sign up for, but if you miss them, all of them are archived on the website. And then there's a trip planning PDF that's on there that you get, if you sign up, and people have said it's been incredibly helpful. I know it's helped me. And then I've partnered with, this is kind of a new endeavor, but it's called Outdoor Class. So that is, think of master class for the outdoors,
Yeah.
specifically about hunting, but it's not just, how to hunt an elk or how to bugle. It's cooking, it's butchery. I've signed up for several years to build multiple courses. Just got done filming the first one 2 weeks ago. Should be out, hopefully early January. Super stoked on that to kind of get back into the teaching realm at a very professional high level. So that should be coming out for outdoor class here, in the new year. So yeah, all that. And then, got a lot of cool stuff we're building at Sitka right now that, just to give you an idea, because I always like to say this because it kind of surprises people, like fall 2023 is done. Almost all fall 24 is done. We're already into 25. So we're working so far ahead, and sometimes you have to, and with supply chain issues and things nowadays, it's almost a must. So yeah, got a lot going on, but really excited about the interest and people, the engagement on, some of the educational pieces. And
I'm really excited for that outdoor class, John, and some of the other names that they've partnered with. Like there's an integrity and a quality to the talent. I'm really looking forward to it because I think it's something that the space, I feel like we're evolving a little bit, and that upper tier level education that is involved in, I'm into photography and filmmaking. It's out there for those things, and it hasn't historically been there for hunting. So it's super cool.
Yeah, and you think about it, I'll just say one more thing. I've talked about this a little bit, but even though I started hunting when I was 13 or 14, I'm kind of a self-taught hunter. I'm a self-taught archery hunter. Like, nobody in my family really did it. My dad hunted some birds. And now the trend is, we'll call them adult onset hunters, right? So people that are not kids, they're adults, even if young adults, they're getting into hunting, which is awesome. But who is helping them? Who is mentoring them? It's not dad. It's not granddad. Maybe it's a brother, right? Maybe it's a friend. But I think we as a community have to build this mentorship and education, because if we don't, where do these people have to turn to? And it's only us to blame if we don't provide that. So I think things like outdoor class, are helping kind of bring that mentorship and education, which I think is so, man, I wished I had it, right? When I was younger. So I'm very honored to be a part of it, and I'm stoked to get this first course out.
I want to touch on one quick thing because something happened to me the other day, and it's really reflective of what you just said, because I think most people think about how can we help these people be more successful, which I think is important, but I'm going to share what happened. And I think there's a flip side to this too. So this relatively new hunter, he's like maybe in his late 20s, didn't really grow up hunting. He comes back from this moose hunt, and I run into him at the gym, and I'm sorry if you're listening to this and you feel like I'm putting you on blast, but he's super happy. He got a moose. I'm super happy. That's great. And then the stories kind of keep rolling. And then it's, he got a bear as well. And I'm like, oh, that's great. And then the story keeps going. And it's like, I was unfortunate we couldn't get the bear meat. And I was like, what? He goes, yeah, it went bad in camp. And I was like, my brain wouldn't, I couldn't even, I'm like, what do you mean it went bad in camp? And it's like, well, we shot it on like day 9, and it was like day 19 before we got a moose, and it hung and it went rotten. And I can tell from the expression on this guy's face, like, oh, you don't even understand what it is. A, what you're saying is highly illegal. And B, like, what a cardinal sin you've just executed or done. And so I'm trying to be somewhat like gentle in my words. And I was still so taken aback. I didn't even really appreciate the gravity of the situation myself. But I realized, and with my podcast and stuff, I'm always talking about how to be more successful with it. But am I spending enough time on like our moral obligations as hunters? Because if you don't have somebody to teach you that it's not okay to kill something, if you don't have a solid plan on how to recover the meat, I guess maybe it is unfair to expect somebody to just know that. But that really, I was like, holy shit, man. So there's dudes just walking around shooting shit and hanging it up. And if they don't leave in time, they're just letting meat rot. And I was just like, okay, that's a bit of a wake up call for me,
There's a whole podcast on this alone. So I won't go deep. I know we're at the end, but I will say that unfortunately I have, so, that guy may or may not know, right? He may not even know what proper meat care is, but
Yep.
we do focus so much on the quote success. And
Yeah.
I think in my November newsletter, I think it was either that or this month, I say, we all need to define what success means to ourselves.
Right.
Um, but unfortunately I have seen a lack of ethics, what I consider, right? Or kind of abidement of kind of unwritten rules in hunting.
Mm-hmm.
But and I won't mention a couple of the guys, but they're very well known in the industry, and I've had conversations with them, and I said, you know what? I said, you know who's to blame? Not the guy that did it. We are.
Yeah.
We are. Me, you. Now I'm not pointing at you, Jay, but like
No,
I'm
yeah.
talking to them, and I'm like, because they're our friends. We have a platform. Are we saying anything?
Yeah.
Do these guys know, or are we just assuming they did because we've been doing it for so long? So it really falls on us to get the word out and to help them, right? And to not immediately chastise them, which is of course my initial default mode. And go, okay, you know what? Let's talk about this. Let's work through this. Let's have a podcast on, or whatever the case may be. And then at that point, you don't have any excuses. But until then, because they didn't have that mentor, how do they know?
Yeah. And that was the wake up call for me. I was like, oh, you're not telling this story like a guilty person. Like you just don't even understand that what you did was like horribly inappropriate. You know what I mean? And that was why I was like, okay, I need to be a little bit kind and gentle here. This guy doesn't need to get yelled at.
Yeah.
But I also need to convey that like, that's not okay. You know what I mean? Like before you pull a trigger or loose an arrow, you need to think to yourself, like it happens to me. I've put out videos where I'm gone to Hell's Half Acre and people are like, what's your actual plan? Like you think you can actually get an animal? And I'm like, yeah, I do. I might be half crazy, but trust me, if I am back somewhere. But that's the other thing, there's like guys got shit last year because not bringing out enough sheep meat and stuff. And I think that's the other thing that happens is that people, their eyes are bigger than their legs and they get further back in and they don't really appreciate what it means to bring, all that all the way out. And I think there's another host
we see it all the time here in Montana and out west. Because the backcountry hunting craze, hunting off your back is so huge. And, Buddy just told me, he killed a really nice bull towards the end of archery season. He was 9 miles back and he ran into 3 guys from Minnesota. And he's like, how are you going? Like, do you have a packer? He's like, no, we're going to walk, we're going to pack it out. And it's like, bro, you were 2 ridges and 9 miles from the trailhead.
Yeah.
Like there is no way. I had another buddy got called in the middle of the night. His friend shot a bull by himself 5 miles from the trailhead. And, my buddy's like, I can come and help you get one load out. Took the guy 5 days to get the elk out.
Oh,
it's like, come on, man. Like, and so, but we don't talk about it. So, and the, the demand for success is so high in people's minds that, that's what happens. And I think we all have to kind of manage that and deal with it over time.
Yeah, I agree. Last thing, and I don't want to blow too much smoke up your ass, but you guys knocked it out of the park with the ambient hoodie.
Oh, thanks, man.
I've been keeping notes all year, and
I'm
right
so
now
stoked on that thing.
It's the breakaway piece for 2022, in my opinion. I don't think there's any other. It's got me second guessing my puffy in certain situations, which is like, shaving almost a pound off your kit and just the breathability, the warmth of it, the packability of it. I mean, it's just, I've been telling people like, listen, if you're going to buy one new piece of gear, get this because it's one of those things, you know what? It fixed all the issues I had with the Kelvin Active Jacket. That used to be one of my favorite pieces of gear, but like the fact that it didn't have a hood and the full zip, like there was just a couple elements that I was like, it's just not quite right.
Hey,
and
it fixed all my issues too.
Yeah, well, there you go. There you go. And that's what it does for me. It's like this, it's like the perfect Kelvin Active Jacket kind of like leveled up. So thank you. I every now and then you see something that's an actual innovation and not just an iteration. And I do believe that piece is one of those pieces of kit.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Jay. I'm stoked on it. And yeah, I've said this before, but 3 years ago, I had my Iowa whitetail tag. I killed my Iowa whitetail wearing the first proto of the ambient hoodie.
I don't think people understand like how long it actually takes to go from inception to execution to hitting market. It's crazy.
It's years. Yeah. But no, thanks. I appreciate that. That's awesome to hear.
All right, John, as always, it's a pleasure, my friend, and I wish you the best in the rest of the season. And hopefully
Absolutely.
I'm texting you a big fat whitetail pick here in the next couple of weeks.
I can't wait. Can't wait. Good luck, Jay.
All right, John, enjoy your day.